This podcast is brought to you by Progressive. Are you driving your car or doing laundry right now? Podcasts go best when they're bundled with another activity, like Progressive home and auto policies. They're best when bundled, too. Having these two policies together makes insurance easier and could help you save. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. Quote a home and car bundle today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Just a quick heads up that this show involves a developing news story, so some things might have changed by the time you listen. Okay, here's the show. Henry Grabar is Slate's man in Paris right now. And when I called him up on Friday afternoon, he was watching a crowd of people waiting to get into the Olympic opening ceremony.
I'm inside the red zone security perimeter, which has been in place for a week in Paris. And what that means is that pretty much any place that's within about a half mile of the Seine has been closed to cars unless those cars have a special QR code permitting them in. So that's a long way of saying that the street outside is really, really quiet because there's no vehicles. On the other hand, there are about 50 giant police vans. There's some soldiers with big guns, and then there's all the excited French people with their soccer jerseys and their funny hats and their makeup on their like French flags on their cheeks, waiting to get into the ceremony.
French security has been beefed up for weeks ahead of the games, and as it turns out, they had reason to be worried. There was an attack on some high-speed train lines in France. Can you tell me what we know so far about what happened and then kind of what the resulting chaos has been?
Yeah, so there were attacks on some fiber optic cables that control signaling and I think some movement functions on the TGV express trains in France. And these attacks seem to have occurred last night or early this morning at 3 different locations around France, and they have basically reduced traffic on all the mainline railways in France by about 60 to 70% on a day when many, many people were planning to travel, both people coming for the Olympic Games and also lots and lots of Parisians trying to flee before everything gets started.
They're getting out of there.
Yeah, it was definitely a big day to try to leave town. And France obviously has this very robust and extensive high-speed rail network that a lot of people depend on. So, I mean, it's not unheard of that there would be an incident that would disrupt traffic and cause people to miss their trains. But I think what's unusual about this is the apparent sophistication of the attack, right? This was done by people who obviously had an insider's knowledge of how the high-speed rail network functions and where its vulnerabilities lay.
You may not be able to answer this question, but I'm curious if you have had any sense over the course of this day of people, I don't know, feeling different? Like, does this attack undermine a sense that things are safe and secure and moving forward?
No, I don't think so. I think there's a few ways of thinking about it. One is just that it's a little sad to feel like the big day has been undermined by this news story about sabotage on the high-speed rail network. At the same time, I suppose to some extent it does underline the necessity of the security that's been provided around the opening ceremony, which has been extensive to a degree that I can't perhaps convey. Le Monde, the big newspaper here, said this was the most robust deployment of security in Paris at any time ever during peacetime, right? So I'm talking about soldiers, police, barriers, checkpoints. All that stuff has been in place for a week, and I think for anybody who was looking at that and saying, is this really necessary for a big parade along the Seine? Maybe this morning's events will underline the extent to which that's necessary. But I don't think anybody in Paris is looking around and saying, boy, there's not quite enough security here, because there literally could not be more.
Part of that security is the obvious stuff that Henry describes: police, guns, and checkpoints. Then there are the QR codes that visitors and residents need to have scanned to move through Paris. And then there is the unseen part. The part that relies on thousands of cameras throughout Paris, on streets, in metro stations, rail lines, and public plazas. That footage will then be analyzed real time with artificial intelligence, making France the first EU country to allow this kind of surveillance. Today on the show, welcome to the Surveillance Olympics. Is it a necessary precaution for a games tightly knit into the fabric of a major city? Or a dangerous deployment of unreliable technology, one that couldn't stop an attack from happening on the game's very first day? I'm Lizzie O'Leary, and you're listening to What Next TBD, a show about technology, power, and how the future will be determined. Stick around. This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. This episode is brought to you by SAP. First, the bad news. SAP Business AI won't help you generate cubist versions of your family's holiday photos, but it will help you understand which supplier is best to help you roll out your plant-based packaging in Southeast Asia, identify the training your junior project manager needs to rise up the ranks, and automate repetitive tasks while you focus on big innovations, so you can be ready for the next opportunity. Revolutionary technology, real-world results. That's SAP Business AI. On the one hand, Olympic security is nothing new. Ever since the terrorist attack at the 1972 Games in Munich, the International Olympic Committee and the local organizers have invested heavily in law enforcement and traditional surveillance. But it doesn't always work. Think of the bombing at the 1996 Atlanta Games. But it's part of how modern Olympics are run. Add to that the history of recent terrorist attacks in Paris, and this surveillance operation quickly became more widespread and sophisticated than at any preceding games.
It's remarkable.
That's Anne McKenna, a law professor at the University of Richmond and an expert in electronic surveillance.
We have the traditional electronic surveillance tools that law enforcement uses, and that's wiretapping and collection of computer and cellular data, collection of image and audio data. But we also have an unleashing of really advanced artificial intelligence, and from here on, I'll just say AI systems, that are really ramping up what is capable. So just for a minute, if we think about it, we're talking about harnessing every camera, every transportation camera, everyone's cellular data, everyone's device data, because we're all walking around with connected devices, and then using really advanced AI tools to glean incredible insights from all of that data in real time. So it's at a scale that we haven't seen simply because the AI technologies have advanced so rapidly since our last Olympics in Beijing. It really is total situational awareness.
So if you're walking around the streets of Paris, if you're going to see something, or if you're an athlete, like, what are you aware of? Do you know that there are surveillance cameras on you? Can you get a sense of it?
That's interesting. Some French officials have indicated signs will be posted, and in the testing that they've done beforehand, like around Taylor Swift concerts and things like that, as they've been testing these new systems over the last year or so, they put up notices. But for the average person walking around Paris, you're going to see the same kinds of cameras that we're used to seeing in big cities, right? If you've walked around the mall in Washington, D.C. or something, you might notice cameras. But the average person really isn't going to be aware of just how much attention is focused on them from a surveillance perspective and how much data is being collected about them.
For the Games, the French government is working with 4 private tech companies: Videtics, Orange Business, Chaps Vision, and Wintix. They have reportedly developed algorithms to analyze the data and images collected from the surveillance systems around Paris.
And that's part of the problem here. The Olympics present unique security concerns without question. But France is enabling with changes to its law, a collection of vast amounts of data. And there's not really a lot of transparency around how the private entities collecting this data, or the government for that matter, can use the data. Another thing I think that's important for folks to think about is that this is the French government enabling companies to collect all of this massive amount of data about individuals and use it to train and further develop AI systems to their advantage, right? AI systems rely on data. The more data a company has, the more money it can make.
Anne says that each of us is generating data all the time, from our cell phones to anything else that's part of the Internet of Things.
We're talking about every device we have that can connect to the internet. So we're all walking around with at least one device that connects to the internet, our cell phone. But those devices are really embedded with sensors that enable your geolocation tracking and all kinds of other data to be collected. So when we harness our own, devices, these companies are harnessing the users' devices to collect information about the users. And, this is a subject of FTC litigation or Federal Trade Commission litigation here in the U.S. Chaps Vision is, they call themselves the French expert in geo-decision solutions, right? And they create value from your data. They're automated video surveillance. Right? That's what Chaps Vision is doing. And then in terms of the Wintix, right? They've produced something called City Vision, which is video analysis software for urban stakeholders, right? And they pride themselves on transforming ordinary cameras into monitoring tools, because again, it's using existing surveillance technologies that are in place and then overlapping that and using the data collected and the images and the sounds collected and analyzing it with really sophisticated artificial intelligence systems, right, that glean insights from all of that data.
I'm trying to sort of paint a picture of how this might work. So let me roll with this a bit, and you tell me if I'm accurate or not. So let's say that I am sifting through all this data, and what I know from a pattern of your movement is that Anne lives in the 11th arrondissement, and she takes the bus every day, and she goes here and buys a baguette, and then she goes to the office, and then she comes back. But if I start seeing a movement pattern that's different from that, if Anne is carrying a big bag that I happen to notice from the cameras on the bus or the cameras on a light post, that might, trigger some alert that says, hey, we need to send some officers here and figure out what's going on?
Well, that's a great example. Yeah, you could say that would be an accurate description. But let's take it a little bit further. We're really talking about systems that are already trained on data and vast quantities of data that are used. And so you gave this example of, okay, we can see that there's a change in someone's patterns. And that's maybe important from a security standpoint. Or it may be a very private matter that someone's had a significant change in their life, and so they have to visit a particular clinic that they never visited before.
Right.
But I think when we think right about this, it's pervasive and persistent surveillance that the Olympics really has been given France an opportunity to roll out these tools that many say would otherwise violate the European Union's data protection laws. And so, again, going back to that concept of persistent and pervasive, when we talk about the surveillance, like what are these tools going to be doing? We can really, it sounds very rational, right? Like we want to use these tools to detect crowd surges. We want to use these tools to detect a body on the ground. We want to use these tools to detect smoke or fire. And that is very laudatory when we just say it like that, right? That makes common sense. We want to be able to know that, and that we can have artificial intelligence systems flag that for human users to respond appropriately. No problem. But what that doesn't really reveal is what it takes a system to be able to do that. And in order to do that, is it necessary to collect all data? You know, right? Like how much do we need to collect? And then, so we have these watchers watching, right? And part of the problem is who is determining what the watcher is watching and who the watcher is watching? You know, not to use such big brother terms, but we already know when we enable automated, say, facial recognition systems, we consistently see patterns of biases and discrimination, right? The persons who are identified or flagged by that AI watcher often are incorrectly identified or might focus more on a person of color.
Right. We know that facial recognition systems are far less accurate, basically, the darker your skin tone gets.
Exactly. And so now, with very little transparency about how these systems actually work, very little public transparency about the accuracy of these systems or the reliability of these systems, we're just unleashing them. And we're using them with, again, those tools of lawful government surveillance. France has not just, unleash these private companies and the AI surveillance tools. We know from reports that there's a classified provisional decree that allows a significant increase in those typical electronic surveillance tools that I was talking about, right? The data gathering, the wiretapping, the recording of phone calls, and receipt and review of text messages and emails and whatnot.
According to reporting by Le Monde, that decree would allow the intelligence services wider latitude than they previously had. When we come back, why all this stuff may not go away once the Olympics are over.
This is the story of the one. As a maintenance engineer, he hears things differently. To the untrained ear, everything on his shop floor might sound fine, but he can hear gears grinding or a belt slipping. So he steps in to fix the problem at hand before it gets out of hand. And he knows Grainger's got the right product he needs to get the job done, which is music to his ears. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
I'm Reid Hoffman.
And I'm Aria Finger.
If you're interested in learning about how technology and humanity can come together to make a better future, then Possible is for you. We invite ambitious builders and deep thinkers like Trevor Noah, Kara Swisher, Sam Altman, and so many more. Help us sketch out the brightest version of the future and what it will take to get there.
If you want to be part of the future today, then subscribe to Possible wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, I'm Josh Levine, one of the hosts of Slate's weekly sports show, Hang Up and Listen. Every Monday, I'm joined by Joel Anderson, who you might know from Slate's Slow Burn podcast, and Stefan Fatsis. This summer, we'll be diving into the Paris Olympics, watching Simone Biles, Sha'Carri Richardson, and Victor Wembanyama, obsessing over track, team handball, and breakdancing, and talking about the Olympic Committee's Russia ban and sex testing in elite sports. Check out Hang Up and Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
One thing I find very interesting here is that France actually had to change its laws to allow this kind of technology to be used. You're a law professor. What does that tell you?
Well, it tells me that we should all be concerned. There's no question that when you host something like the Olympics, there have to be some adjustments to security measures that are legal and appropriate. But France having to change its laws to accommodate this, it's interesting because they changed the laws in such a way to allow the use of these AI surveillance tools and the increased other surveillance tools before the Olympics, during the Olympics, and after the Olympics.
Right, this goes till March.
Right. So think about why do we need that after? And part of it is that data, there's so much data being collected. I think it's really hard for us as average folks to wrap our mind around just how much data is being collected and just how revealing that data can be. You gave the example of tracking someone and knowing what their regular patterns are. That's a profile that is available for every human being who has any kind of internet-connected device or cell phone. So for France, again, I mentioned that European Union, it has a General Data Protection Regulation Law, or GDPR. And that law is really one of the strongest data privacy laws in the world. It's changed how businesses function in an effort to protect individual privacy. And so there's a lot of questions. Civil societies in France and civil liberties organizations have pointed out that this hold on to this data and this continued use of allowing artificial intelligence systems, right, autonomous decisions to keep going through all of this data, that in fact, that's violating GDPR because it's collecting and processing data about individuals that the law would otherwise protect.
There's a part of the bill that was put forth to change this law that essentially approved the use of predictive surveillance technology, and I'm quoting here, that attempts to detect, here's the quote, predetermined events. What does that mean?
Right? So when we see predictive, our mind might go to movies about surveillance. Predictive analytics are also very problematic. When we look at predictive analytics, we're talking about making predictions about what someone will do or won't do, or a thing that will happen or won't happen based upon all the data within the system, right? And so that's really concerning because predictive analytics are different for every person based upon their appearance, the zip code where they live, the color of their skin, their gender, right? Like how they identify, their religious preferences. And that's a problem. When we make predictive analytical decisions, we don't have transparency around how that was done. It's that black box problem you hear folks talk about sometimes, but how did the system come to this conclusion? And so predetermined events, predictive analytics, that's, again, using all kinds of information, but making assumptions based upon people's appearance, people's behavior, people's background, people's religious affiliation. And that's a problem.
You mentioned the biases that are often baked into this kind of technology, but I think anyone who has tried out even ChatGPT over the past year has encountered the moment when AI gets something wrong. What has the French government and what have these providers said about how reliable this technology is?
We don't have transparency around the reliability numbers. We don't have, at least in the publicly available domain, information that's telling us the accuracy and reliability, other than representations that it is accurate and reliable, right? And that's part of the problem around this, is that we can't test, we can't validate, we can't verify, right? There's not auditing that we have in place at a global level that understands, hey, let's audit this system and make sure it is in fact accurate to a point of reliability. And when I say that, I mean, think about it from a legal perspective. Like, is it reliable enough that it's evidence that we could admit it into a court of law? The accuracy and reliability of these systems, there just isn't transparency around them.
So we just don't know.
We just don't know. But we can look at the historical data when we see systems used. And you mentioned, right? Like, we know facial recognition systems are not as accurate when it comes to persons of color. We also know that there's regular misidentification of individuals, and that tends to skew, again, towards persons of color, right? That's historical data. So I think the problem around this is we have decisions being made. We don't fully understand how they're being made. We don't have the accuracy and reliability of them. And so we really turned over control to a private sector that is excited in advancing these technologies at neck-breaking pace.
What does the government of France say to these objections?
The government of France is really attempting to assure the public that there will be transparency and that this surveillance is necessary for the security of the Olympics themselves, for the French citizens and the visitors of that. You know, there was significant pushback when France changed its laws and significant objection, but nothing's really played out yet at the European Union level regarding these laws. France is dealing with a lot, but it seems like it's getting a free pass here. It's getting a free pass because the Olympics presents an exceptional need for surveillance. And the problem is France is using that exceptional justification, i.e. the Olympics, to normalize total pervasive surveillance.
Do you think this shifts the Overton window? That from now on, if there's a big event, whatever it is, it'll just be standard to incorporate AI into the security devices, and this bell will be kind of hard to unring?
I think this bell will be very hard to unring, right? Civil liberties, once lost, are rarely regained. And the part of the problem, will this bell be hard to unring? When you have a synergy between a government changing its law and private sector collection and analysis of data, and private sector access to all of the infrastructure and surveillance tools of government, we have a problem. And we see that collaboration of, let's change our laws to make this legal and possible. Let's try to avoid any problems with data privacy laws in the European Union. You know, because of this exceptional need, how do you go back from that? If we look at this application of technology at the Olympics, are we using artificial intelligence to determine who should be arrested, who should be held, who should be stopped? And that seems to be a critical decision, right? It's what's the risk associated with that decision, and it's your freedom. So it's a significant risk. So I think what we're going to see is, how do these Olympics play out, and what does that post, use data tell us? Who is going to be stopped? How is the data going to be used? What is being done with the data? What insights can be gleaned from the data? It's we always hear this term, privacy is dead. And it's not. It's that we need to balance the very real need for security, as well as the need for privacy, or we really no longer have, it'd be incredibly difficult to have democratic institutions.
Anne McKenna, thank you so much for your time and for coming on the show today.
It's been a pleasure. It's really nice talking to you.
Anne McKenna is an attorney and law professor at the University of Richmond. And that is it for our show today. What Next TBD is produced by Evan Campbell, Patrick Fort, and Shayna Roth. Our show is edited by Paige Osborne. Alicia Montgomery is vice president of audio for Slate, and TBD is part of the larger What Next family. And if you like what you listen to today, the single best thing you can do to support us is to join Slate Plus. Just head on over to slate.com/whatnextplus to sign up. All right, we'll be back next week with more episodes. I'm Lizzie O'Leary. Thanks for listening.